welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. Well, just when we thought that the Modi government could hit the ground running because it had the advantage of continuity and with the numbers that they've got in the recent elections, they had a huge advantage to tackle the slowing economy. We had Mr. Jaitley, the former finance minister, I'm using the word former because he just dropped a bombshell on us saying that he will not be available for the next government. So what kind of blueprint can we suggest to the new government, particularly for the finance ministry, which is really the guardian of the economy? And that's what we're going to attempt to do in this edition of Macros with Mythili. Two eminent guests. We have with us Professor Anant Nageshwaran, eminent economist and presently at the Indian Institute of Financial Management and Research, Chennai. And we also have with us R. Gopalan, former Secretary Finance, Government of India. Welcome to the show, Anant.
Thank you.
Gopal. Let me start by asking both of you that what is the kind of agenda that we could draw for this government, particularly in the light of the bombshell that I said Mr. Jaitley has dropped on us. To start with, let me start by asking you, is the economy, what is the state of the economy in your assessment? Does it really need a crutch or does it not need a crutch? Could it be business as usual? And can the government continue as it has been doing in the past? Let me start with you, Anand.
I think the economy is firing slightly below its optimal capacity. The official growth rate may be close to 7%, but the actual growth rate could be somewhere between 5 and 6%. Credit growth is constrained by the non-availability of adequate capital in the financial institutions. The non-banking financial corporations are not in a position to continue to lend as they were doing in the last 2 years. And the export performance has been lackluster, to put it very mildly. Agricultural sector is going to be very much dependent on the monsoon spatial and longitudinal distribution. Already the pre-monsoon showers are disappointed. So the economy is fragile in my view.
Is the economy growing, as you said, only at about 5 to 6%? Would you agree with that assessment, Gopal?
My view is that this year we will be looking at somewhere around 6.8 to 7% growth for the entire fiscal. But the first half will be a real slowdown. Now, you look at any indicator if you want to look at, whether it is you look at the indicators relating to, transportation sector, commercial vehicles growth, two-wheeler growth, tractors growth, railway traffic and aviation traffic, services PMI. You look at any of those indicators, they are really showing a great amount of slowdown. Now, industrial, this thing, you saw the IIP numbers, which are very poor, and manufacturing, this thing is also not, giving any, sense for courage. And you know that, investment demand is very, very low. So from all this, I get the impression that the economy is in a fragile state, as Anant mentioned. It's going to be for the last quarter, the 2019, January, March, quarter, the numbers are going to be much lower. So my guess is that for the year 18-19, the growth rate would be around 7 to 7.2. And for 19-20, it will be around 6.8 to 7. So there is a slowdown, and there are measures which are required to be taken.
Okay, Anand, both of you say that the economy is slowing down, but Gopal still puts the growth at about 7.2, which would in fact make us one of the fastest growing economies among the major economies. So why is it that both of you are seeing the glass as half empty rather than as half full, and not a very happy state of affairs that you're describing to any potential new finance minister? What makes you think that things are worse than what they are, rather than things not being better than what they are? Because in a slowing global economy, with the trade wars looming in the horizon, all said and done, 7.2 is not bad at all, Anand. So what makes you so despondent about it is my first question. My second question really would be, in that case, is there a need for a stimulus? We'll go to the what kind of stimulus later, fiscal or monetary, but is there a need for a stimulus at all, Anand?
No, I think you had a couple of very interesting questions, Mythili. I didn't say that there is a cause for despondence. I classified the economy as fragile in the sense that we are operating at slightly below potential, 6.8 to 7.2 or 7 to 7.2, depending on which financial year. Based on official statistical data, that number is quite good. And even if as I mentioned, we are indeed growing at somewhere between 5 and 6%. In reality, even that number isn't anything to be sneezed at, because the global economy is in its 10th year of expansion post 2009, and it is showing signs of slowdown. There is a trade war, there is uncertainty about oil supplies, etc. So given that, even a growth rate of between 5 and 6% is quite a good situation to be in. So there is no need for despondency. In fact, I would even argue that we have to accept the current growth rate is probably the optimal under the given circumstances, both domestic and international. Therefore, the question is, do we need a stimulus? And if we do indeed need a stimulus, it should be because we should be very clear that the growth rate is below potential and something can be done to stimulate it. And when we do stimulate, we should look at the cost and the benefits, not just the benefits of a stimulus. And do we have the room to undertake a stimulus? Will it be short-term positive but medium to long-term negative? These questions have to be answered, and therefore I would even argue situation may be fragile, but keep watching, keep doing structural things. But stimulus, I would say, the efficacy, in my opinion, is doubtful, and therefore I would take more time to ask for a stimulus rather than simply saying accept the reality and work with it.
Okay, Gopal, as a former finance secretary, you were to be called by the new finance minister and say, please give me some advice. You have so much experience. Would you advocate a stimulus? Because after all, the government can only have a fiscal stimulus, which means really relaxing the fiscal deficit target. So what would you advise the new FM? Because governments ultimately have just two levers, fiscal, monetary. The monetary lever is with the Reserve Bank of India, especially post the MPC. So the government really effectively has only a fiscal lever. So would you tell him, Mr. Finance Minister, stop being so fundamentalist about the fiscal deficit target? Never mind if it goes up to, what, say 3.7, 3.8%. Right now, the economy needs some support. So go out and give it. What would you tell the new Finance Minister, Gopal?
Well, the temptation of any new finance minister is to show growth. Especially when he has inherited a situation like this, there will be a temptation. Now, look at what the revenues are likely to be. Even last year, if you look at the postponements of expenses or the previous fiscal into this fiscal, and this year's fiscal numbers which are supposed to come in were advanced and taken credit of in the previous fiscal. If you look at all those things, even otherwise, my computation is that the fiscal deficit was up by 0.5%. So now what is the room available? Today you find that the direct tax collection, the CBDT is saying that the demand given in the interim budget is just impossible to do. They are looking at only 12 lakh crores against 13.8 lakh crores which the interim budget demanded. Okay, now look at the GST collection. The April collection was around about 1.1 lakh crores, but that was, the March end kind of collection. Now this month it is not going to cross more than, according to my information, not crossing more than 96,000 crores. Now look at the numbers they have assumed in the GST. That also looks little optimistic. Now on the expenditure side, you find that the numbers of government expenditure, the staff expenditure which you assumed, the increase you have assumed is little, I would say little underrated. Now, if you look at all these things, there is an overstatement of revenue, understatement of expenditure. Now, if you look at all this, even to get the interim budget numbers is going to be very difficult. A sensible finance minister would try to stick to whatever it is and try to see that he gets the number which is doable. Two, as Anand said, you also have to see if the economy is in a position to absorb a stimulus. Now the potential, it is now performing under its potential. As RBI, figures indicate, they are now performing under its potential. Now if that is the case, then what is the scope for further pushing in more money? And that if that is to be done, obviously there will be hit somewhere, inflation and so on, or a current account deficit. There will be other problems that might arise. So the advice I would give is go into structural areas to begin with now. Take a deep this thing on land, on labor, on housing, on construction, on loans to small industries, MSMEs. I would ask that these sectors to be attended to immediately to relieve the stress in the sector, make them more transparent and more easy in terms of functioning, and ensure that this sector is able to perform and live up to its true potential. then obviously if you make all other changes which are required to be done, then capital will certainly flow into the economy. Now unless you do this, it is no point in trying to say that I got to get 7%, I got to get 7.5%. I think we must be realistic.
Okay. Anand, would you echo Gopal's sentiments? Because though he talked about the need for reform, and nobody can deny that, the fact is that many of the things that he mentioned, whether it is land or labor reform, requires buy-in from other parts of the government. They're not entirely in the finance minister's domain. So given that he has his limitations, he was new to the job, even though he's part of the same government continues, would you say that, we, as Gopal said, stick to that fiscal deficit target? Or yes, knowing full well that if you give fiscal prudence a go by, you could again stoke inflationary fires, take the view that since inflation is relatively low, you could afford to take that risk and be a little bit more relaxed about fiscal deficit. Would that be your view, Anand?
No, I think he is right. Finance ministry is not the one that actually generates economic growth. It may be nominally deemed responsible for it because it is the ministry that has, and the Department of Economic Affairs is there. They put out these reports, they prepare the budget. But actually, economic activity is a function of all other ministries, in fact. And one of the complaints against structural reforms, which Mr. Gopalan mentioned, is that they take time. But then you have a new government, which has got a wonderful mandate, and they can afford to expend some political capital in these structural reforms. And some of them may, in fact, have a signaling effect, and that it could be a stimulus in some sense. Yes, there are things that need to be done. The banking sector has to be fixed. And maybe even without the government, one can look at what RBI can do. There is a monetary policy meeting coming up. And is the transmission working properly? Is the marginal cost of lending rate the right way to dictate lending decisions which should be taken on a commercial basis by the entities? So there are many things that the government can do without necessarily incurring more government expenditure or cutting taxes. So to that extent, I agree with what Mr. Gopalan said.
Okay, so I think both Gopal as well as Anand don't paint a very happy picture before the new FM. But I'm afraid it's time for us to slip into a very short break. Please just stay with us, because after the break we'll come to the specific issue of what are the things that the new finance minister can do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Draw up a blueprint of action for the finance minister. What is doable and what is not. But after a break. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and I'm in discussion with two experts, Anant Nageshwar and R. Gopalan, on trying to draw up a blueprint for the new finance minister. Not just for the government, but for the new finance minister specifically. Anant, before the break, I was a little disappointed, I must confess, to find that both you and Gopalan look at the glass as a little half empty, whereas I tend to see it as more half full. But the fact is that the new finance minister is going to have a very tough call, because at the end of the day, Mr. Jaitley did steer the economy through, of course, fairly easy times in one sense, but he did steer three remarkable reforms: the IBC, the GST, as well as the monetary policy framework. Now, would it seem that any new finance minister has boots which are rather big to fill? Expectations are quite high. So in that case, what would you tell him to start off by doing first? What is the low-hanging fruit that he could immediately deliver on within his domain? Structural reforms, I agree, are necessary, but that's only that much that a finance minister can do. So what can he do within his own domain to show that, yes, he is living up to those high expectations, he's trying to fill the vacuum left by Mr. Jaitley? Anand.
So whether the glass is half empty or half full is a matter of semantics. I still think, as I told you, 5 to 6% GDP growth is nothing to be sneezed at. I'll be happy, given the global situation and given the uncertainties in the economy itself, given the lack of investment demand, lack of credit offtake, and agricultural sector owes, even growing at 5 to 6% is actually a good thing. As far as what the finance minister should be focusing on is, clearly the banking crisis does provide an opportunity, even within the public sector ownership framework, to come up with better performance-based recapitalization, and maybe even to attempt a couple of banks being privatized while retaining the overall public sector character of the Indian banking system. So it should be a mixed ownership as we have today, but there can be experimental privatization, and for the remaining banks, recapitalization, which has to go beyond basic minimum required to continue to exist, to be able to lend, the extra capital that is required should be made contingent on performance measurements, which the 14th Finance Commission had indeed recommended. The second thing I would do is I would indeed review the monetary policy framework, look at whether the 4% inflation target should have a symmetric band of 2% around it, or should it be an asymmetric band with the lower end being 3% and the upper end being 6%, or even have a committee to look into whether India should go back to the multiple indicators framework. And the third thing I would do is restore credibility to the government statistics, to GDP statistics. Make the data and the methodology transparent. These are the three important things I would do to start with.
Okay. Gopal, would you agree with the priority list drawn up by Anand? I think I would agree with him on recapitalization of banks, but I'm not very sure that I agree with him entirely on privatization, because as we've seen with many of the private sector banks, ICICI Bank being a classic example, that privatization itself is not a cure. And in the case of public sector banks, along with recap, you have to have governance reform. So if I were to take one of his points about recapitalization, which is something that can be done by the finance minister, would you agree that recap should be done in one go, not in driblets, and must be accompanied by governance reform? Gopal?
Well, I mean, I agree to a great extent with what Anand says. You see, some of the banks have to be privatized and merged. Let me tell you, it is like this. Take a 33% equity, have a golden share if it is necessary. If some of your programs have to be implemented through the banks, give them the money so that the cost is met by the government, more efficient cost is met by the government in implementing all the programs. Because you see the 3 C's, the CAG, CVC and CBI, I mean that is hanging like a Damocles sword over the bank management. Their ability to deliver as anyone else's is being stymied. Let me give an example. I know one PSU which was privatized, one GM who was taking a very conservative view in a PSU. When it became a private PSU, he was able to come up with very glowing kind of solutions to solve problems. You see, the way you free them up from all this, that makes them perform definitely a lot better. I'd also look at a few other things apart from what Anand said. One relates to, taxation. The DTC is very important. The sooner we bring it, the better it is. Now, in taxation area, certainty in the taxation policies, regulations. Whatever you do, they are, you don't, make them run round to give huge targets, which enables them to do a lot of other things. The areas like mines and minerals is a very low-hanging fruit at this point in time. You can go ahead to get the law, the policy revised and law made out, so that can bring in quite a good amount of this thing. And on agricultural side, obviously the kind of reforms which are required to be done have to be, pushed forward. Mythili, don't think that finance minister can only say so much. Now, finance minister has to push the way it has got to be pushed, whether he wants to have a GST-like type of council for state, along with states, for agriculture, which is very important, for health, which is very important, education, which is very important. If you are able to get all those things in place, obviously you will be in a position to do something good. But he'll have to use the Prime Minister's authority and whatever authority he has in the government to get all these things going. It is not only with reference to this. And third, the exports. Now you have got, there is a view that all the levies which are which are not now that MEIS has a problem in WTO, you must look at how various levies which are charged, state governments levies, electricity duty and cess on various fuels and those kind of things, VAT on those kind of things, those have to be kind of adjusted. If you are able to adjust that, obviously the exports performance will go up and MEIS need not be can be given up. So these are some of the issues which a finance minister will have to use his heft and ability to push these things through. There are a lot of other things which can come up in next 2-3 months, but initially these are the things which are required to be pushed into.
Anand, Gopal made a very valid point that the finance minister will have to use his heft with the Prime Minister. And that makes us a very crucial question of, will the new Finance Minister have the necessary political weight in the cabinet with the PM to push through the reforms that are perhaps not strictly in his domain? So in an attempt to narrow down the discussion, let me just focus on the areas that you mentioned, which could be perhaps more narrowly defined as within his domain, one of which was the MPC. You said the inflation target should perhaps be reworked. But remember, now it is legislated. So any kind of change will require a legislative change. Now, can we hope for the new Finance Minister to bring about that necessary legislative change, or will it be an informal kind of agreement, quote unquote, with the new governor, because we also have a new governor in place, to have a relook at the entire way we have interpreted inflation targeting? Because one of the problems really has been that perhaps monetary policy, of course with the wisdom of hindsight, has been too tight, and we have paid the price in terms of growth. So would you think that the MPC reformulation can be done informally and then followed by legislative change? Anand?
No, well, whether a legislative change needs to happen immediately or the government and the RBI together appoint a committee to review this inflation targeting framework, its efficacy and effectiveness, now that at least 3 years have passed since the framework came into existence, is we can look at it whether it is an immediate legislative action or at least a signal that the government is open-minded about it by appointing a committee. Now, this can be done regardless of whether we agree that the monetary policy has been too tight or just about right, etc. In fact, this is independent of that, because the empirical evidence across the world is that an inflation targeting central bank doesn't necessarily mean that inflation expectations are anchored, and it has not happened in the Indian case in any case. So that is so whether it is an immediate legislative action or appointment of committee is a matter of detail. But the more important thing is also RBI has had the base rate framework and then the marginal cost of lending framework, and there was supposed to be a weighted average external benchmark which is being postponed now. But the important thing is, why not operating decisions or pricing a product? A loan is a financial sector's product. Why can't that decision be left to the operating entities, and why should the regulator and the owner have a role to play in this? Because there could be some borrowers for whom the bank may decide not to recover its entire operating cost, because the good quality borrower then will come to the bank. Now, in spite of having a cost-plus basis of marginal cost of lending, we have so much of NPA. I think there are things that can be done, and this would be a stimulus in itself. Let the good banks be able to price its loans according to what it deems best. These are all decisions that need to be taken, and this is also part of the monetary policy framework re-examination.
Absolutely. Gopal, it's almost time for us to end the show. So let me just end with one final question to you, which is that in the run-up to the election, we saw the government make a distinct shift to the left, whether it was in terms of the quasi-universal basic income or the increase in MSP, etc., which the government was resisting, the loan waivers, etc. Do you expect the new finance minister to continue with that shift to the left, or was that only electioneering talk? Gopal?
Okay. Now, I forgot to mention about MSMEs. I don't know whether I mentioned about the low-hanging fruit as MSMEs. That's a very good area which requires to be looked into very, very quickly in terms of credit guarantee and flow of credit to them. There are a lot of things that can be done there which will kickstart the economy, which I think we will be in a position to do that. New finance minister will be in a position to do that. As far as the your question about the left of center, well, you must understand that this Prime Minister may be right, so-called right in terms of, other policies, but in terms of his economics, he is left of center. Now, the pain which people have, undergone in agriculture, in various old age and those kind of things he has seen, and he now is alive to that in a very, very big way. So I guess, or my guess is that the policies will certainly maintain a left of center orientation as far as economics is concerned.
Thank you so much, Anand and Gopal, for joining me in discussion and presenting a rather ambitious blueprint, I say, for the new finance minister. I say for the poor new finance minister, because given the big expectations, the high expectations, the tall, long laundry list that you've given to him is not going to make life easy for him. We don't have much time before the budget. The budget will come up in July. But here's wishing him all the best from everybody in ET Now, and of course from our two guests. Thank you very much for watching. We'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.